My name is Lexian McBain, and today I'll be doing a presentation on embryology of the dural sinus. Okay, so to begin, I'm just going to be looking at the location of the dural sinus within the brain, the stages of development of the dural sinus, the prominent vessels at each stage, and some of the defects or pathologies involved. Okay, so this is a picture of the dural sinus, or general picture. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through the development of every vessel, because that is going to be a whole other lecture. So I'm going to pay attention to the larger ones, such as the superior sagittal sinus, the transverse sinus, the sigmoid sinus, and somewhere along we're going to have mention of other minor vessels. Okay. So to begin, like I said, the location of the venous sinus is within the dural mater, so between the endothelial layer and the meningeal layer. The function of it is really to drain blood from the internal as well as the external structures of the brain. And the components of the dural sinus is basically you have 6 paired vessels as well as 4 unpaired vessels. So 6 paired vessels will be our transverse, our cavernous, superior and inferior petrosal veins, our phenoparietal, and our sigmoid sinus. The 4 unpaired would be our superior and inferior sagittal veins, our straight, and as well as our septal veins. Okay, so for my presentation, for my review overall, I paid attention to the chronology stages of development, and so the stages goes from 1 to 23, and it covers 8 weeks from, 8 weeks from ovulation, pretty much. I also have a table that goes through 8 stages. So the first week from ovulation will cover stages 1 to 4, second 5 to 6, 3, 7 to 9, and so on. Okay, so looking at the development, we start with our first identifiable vessel, and that would be a vena capitis medialis. I wish I had a pointer, but I don't. So I'm going to be pointing a little bit here. So we begin, this is our vena capitis medialis, and if you can look at it, you'll see that it runs medially to our trigeminal vessel here and our otic vessel. And right here, you have your cardinal vein, which is going to join up with your vena capitis medialis. So as we continue, and the embryo continues to grow, you'll see that what was once medial to our otic vessel has now become lateral, and this area is called our vena capitis lateralis. Okay. And here we can also see 3 prominent vessels, our anterior, our medial, and our posterior plexus. We also can see our maxillary vein also, which is also a primordial vein that is going to develop later on into the inferior orbital vein. Our cavernous sinus. So again, I'll be pointing. So cavernous sinus is going to develop from the area medial to our trigeminal vessel right here, our trigeminal ganglion. And on this slide, we cannot exactly, I didn't point it out exactly, but we're going to see it later on as we go along. So let's focus more on the vascular plexus. So like I pointed out in previous slides, this is simply a view of it. You have your 3 vascular plexus, A, anterior, B, mid venous, or middle plexus, and your posterior plexus. Here you'll see that what is formed and is pointed out by the arrow that shows A is anastomosis between the middle and the posterior plexus. And this will later on go on to form the sigmoid portion of the transverse plexus, the transverse sinus. Right. And what is also pointed out on this slide is C shows the maxillary vein as well as the ophthalmic vein. I didn't mention before, but your anterior plexus, middle plexus, and posterior plexus, it drains your hindbrain, your midbrain, and the forebrain respectively. So for the look at the development of the dural sinus, we have our superior sagittal sinus. So the development of the superior sagittal sinus actually starts from the time the embryo is 14 millimeter long. And what you have is the larger branches of your anterior plexus and your middle plexus, they begin to fuse. So if you look at the first diagram here, this is a view of your anterior and middle plexus sort of just kind of fusing together and growing ventrally into the cerebral. So it continues along until you have this almost like a single channel later on. So this is this sort of not exactly a better view of the superior sagittal plexus, but the plexus that I showed you before, the anterior, middle, and the posterior plexus. It also gives you a better view of our primitive head veins as well as our maxillary vein. And it's just pointed out with different color and arrows. Okay, so our transverse sinus. Okay, when the embryo is between 35 to 50 millimeter long, you can sort of recognize a main channel that grows out from the tentorial plexus. And I didn't mention before, but your tentorial plexus is actually what is called the anterior and the middle plexus after they merge. Is referred to as the tentorial plexus. So from that plexus, you see an extension that is known as a transverse sinus. So this picture right here is supposed to show that if you, so this is supposed to be the sigmoid portion of our transverse sinus, and this would be the confluence of sinus, which would then form from your tentorial plexus. So what you have here is a connection, which would be the transverse section, almost connecting to our internal jugular vein, if you just disregard this portion right here. So like I said, right there, you have the confluence of sinus. It's also known as the tubular hierophili, and is referred in many books as the confluence sinuum. So what it is a remnant of the tentorial plexus, because as you have growth of the superior sagittal plexus, it takes up most of the space, and then you have the tentorial plexus becoming a little smaller. Eventually, you have caudal growth of that plexus, and the remnants of the end of it, you end up with the confluence of sinus. So this is pretty much a look of the embryo at different stages. I don't know how clearly you could see it, but it starts from 4 millimeter to adult life right here. I'm not going to go into details of each stage, but pretty much this is what happened. Okay, so developmental defects that could occur during the development of the embryo would be a dural sinus fistula as well as AV malformation. So you get a fistula in areas where you have previous sinus occlusion. And one of the most common one would be the vein of Galen aneurysm. Just gonna mention a little bit about it. If I get into my references. Stop it. Okay, anyway. All right. So you also have arteriovenous malformation, and this is one of the defects that, or pathologies that could also occur during development of the embryo. And how the malformation generally occurs is that while the embryo grows, you generally have different veins or embryological structures disappearing, and new anastomoses are formed. So if there's any defects in forming this new vessel or any connection, then you end up with a malformation that could go ahead to stillbirth. And this is it. It's my references.